Yeah, no problem. Yeah, 100%. Okay. Yep. Okay. Oh, geez. Well, I've been on Reddit since. If I look at my other account, 1 second. Um, I've been on Reddit since probably, at least this account was made on July 8th, 2012, but I was on before I created the account. So probably since like 2010, 11, or around thereabouts. I got interested in Reddit for medical and basically political reasons. That's how I think I was referred to it, or kind of came across it initially through some physicians. I initially encountered Reddit as a website for researchers and stuff and sciencey people, as far as I knew as a younger child, and less so as what a normal forum or social media site, since this was basically my first forum that I really ever participated in. And back then, I didn't actually comment, do much than read things, but that was kind of how it was for me back then. I didn't even participate in the political topics either, or go to the our politics and such once that was created later on. Like, I predate like that. Like, before that, I think before that was maybe even a sub specifically. Um, but back when they had to split the communities into initially, for political discussions and non and such like that. I remember when that kind of happened, even if I didn't quite understand it at the time. Um, is that a good sufficient answer? Yeah, basic. I mean, this and like, yeah, for solely online things and not participating like in association with me playing a video game or something with some friends in real life. Even if I associate real and online as basically the same thing for me, I this was my first solo participation into anything, for sure. Uh, I participated a little bit in some earlier anime communities, kind of, but it was more of like a me attempting to participate to kind of like get out there and try. Um, when I And that was partially because of Reddit, because of things I read on Reddit about trying to like basically like pump yourself up and learn how to be more social and things of that nature, since I wasn't as much in certain ways back then. I was about 8th grade. um, so I was just young, and I was like, okay, I'll go try some other forums, and they were like, um, the Minecraft.net forums, the My Anime List, Anime Ultima or something like that. A few things like that, but I basically would make like one text post or thread or something that would just or like say hello or something, and then I was kind of like, this just isn't for me. The only reason I stuck around on Reddit was because of kind of the more Redditor community aspects that they had back then, or kind of championed. This site kind of had a very unique culture to it, especially back in those earlier days, I'd say, for sure. And that kind of kept me solely here, basically. Looking for information. Initially, I was basically taught, as they taught us back then, for cancer patients as children, to because of what was going on in the United States, and this is old school. So this is 2008. Um, this is older Facebook, like the concept of misinformation and disinformation regarding the spread of information and the dissemination thereof organically through normal users and citizens domestically of the United States, and how that's affected like election cycles and politics and things of that nature, and medicine, especially because of the, like you can see with COVID. None of that was a concept back then for the main United States. And I don't know if you were a researcher back then and know exactly what I'm talking about, but they sat me down and it was expressed to me, basically the other children, and taught us in a child in manner disseminable to children. Here is what I just said to you, and this exists. And I was able to catch on extremely quickly that, oh, that's a thing, and I need to watch out for it, because to us back then, nobody knew what type of cancer we had. For it was stage four meliotic melanoma, a type of childhood cancer, so extremely rare, and nor our type of treatment, which immunotherapy, which now might be more ubiquitous, because of like the Nobel Prize that was won for basically that, and other immunotherapy advancements in the United States, and because of a lot of other cancer treatments that now use it, or different types. But like 10 years ago, we were the first, and we were the first with children, and so nobody knew anything about it. So I was frequently encountering in real life people who just didn't understand. And then I'd encounter that on Facebook and things. Me as a child not actually posting, but me looking for information, like from physicians and researchers, which I was told to do. And was so looking for information was definitely a key to that. And Reddit, and they gave me a few social media sites to basically, I'm not going to say 100% audit, but like, even for a child not understanding, review. And it was like, try this one, try this one, try this one, try this one. Like, and we'll get you an account. Like, I have a Twitter account from that era, same for Facebook. I don't think Reddit was around yet, for at least not for accounts, but they may have brought it up to me at the hospital a few times as one of the incubator projects for Y Combinator, I think, or something like that. I think Reddit was probably Y Combinator, because they were associated in the early days with at least funding from the United States. In part, they had it on lists, for potential future successful to like control for medical reasons information. They don't want people just spreading misinformation about the cancer kids, like, because that could be very dangerous. And it was. You don't see that as much now, but I see it with COVID all the time, and it, but that was really what was going on for me for social media. It was never like I was never interested in sharing or posting myself. I didn't really care back then, and I still it's not my personality type. I'm more of a participation type person, and so I didn't actually. And I was back then too. I wanted to do something less so like share something. So I gravitated towards the only one that I could find which was Reddit, that was more of a do something, and less so to the others that were options that I knew of, or was basically given as an option. Since you were age locked out of most websites, unless you just lied. I just lied, But they also were like, it's okay to lie about this. You need to lie about this to get the account. So I was like, okay. But most other people I knew never had the accounts way back then. I was basically the only kid, probably almost certainly in my zip code for a while, and that was kind of I just didn't do anything with it. But with Reddit, I was pretty frequently on uh, from the get go, at least reading. Hmm. Well, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm pretty autistic, and uh, let's just say back then I was not quite so articulate, nor understanding as much of what was going on. Or I was, but not very socially competent in certain things. So I don't really think I interpreted things as a negative memory at all for certain things. It was more frustrating to me to see people basically tell me on like Facebook or tell other people, that's what bothered me more, that I didn't exist or my cancer wasn't real or something like that, or like those types of, or like that. I guess I by the time the treatment started working for any of us, like our group, uh, we were being the first. There was, I guess, still enough understanding in the United States of it, especially with children, to just not really like go there for like telling them not to have treatment completely, even though it did happen, and I do remember that, and it was even brought up to have some of us appear potentially if that was required for Congress and such. That was something discussed multiple times when I don't know, I was like 11 or 12. It never ended up coming to pass that I know of. It could have with some of the slightly older children, but it was that kind of a situation for me. Yeah, they might they were not like in a C-SPAN hearing, but in the much lower scale ones where they just collect information, sort of a thing, and hear statements and stuff to like educate congressmen before they get to the point where they're going to get the real deal thing. So like their staffers, and then like etc. and etc. like scales kind of, to my very basic understanding, not in a like open, obviously, just like flat out where the media is allowed and stuff. That wouldn't be allowed as children. That would it wouldn't have been appropriate for that situation. But that was kind of the perspective they were going for, was that there was serious concern, even if it ended up not being necessary. There it was still very concerning, for some physicians were expressing and such about. I mean, I still, even a few years ago, I still encountered physicians who were denying effects of my after effects of my treatment, and the neurological damage because of probably orders that they had received way back when in order to keep um, potentially classified information from being disseminated. And this could have been just them not understanding how that actually works, because that was actually never the that would have never been applicable, even if they signed something. It just because I'm the patient and it they're my doctor kind of a thing. But I used to all the time receive a rote robotic response, like obviously memorized, in X treatment does not cause X effects kind of a thing, while they're staring at the patient that obviously had the effects from the treatment and them being inexpert, probably researching that same treatment, if you can understand where I'm coming from. So that was that kind of a misinformation to where even the doctors at face value may have had to flat out lie to people who didn't weren't in the know for because they didn't need to know and because they had to protect the patients. It was kind of and a lot of it had to do really, which I didn't understand then, but did when I got a bit older, uh, with the 2008 election for the president, and through like 2012 with like whatever for the Affordable Care Act, there was a whole lot of concern with that, regarding especially childhood cancers, and that's when I really participated, especially with Reddit. That was my start. Was I was one of the oldest and probably only one still alive in my group, and I was just articulate enough at that point to be like, "Hey, I'm still here. I know there's got to be other patients who are doing even better, who are still here. We this today I learned thread is incorrect, etc." Uh, back. Sorry, I don't want to ramble on. Mm. Childhood, pediatrics older, childhood is younger. It'll be if you do add that to your paper, that'll make a big difference for indexing basically. Yeah, yes, basically, because they were brand new. Correct. No, 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 no. You're doing a great job. I just want to make sure that you do note that the suppression of information about it isn't necessarily a, a in inverse relation a negative relationship to the spreading awareness. It's more of, in my perspective as a patient, from who I interacted with, it was typically to protect us, even if in a misguided extent. Usually with the physicians and stuff, and they kept us isolated, of course, the uh, from the worst offenders who would have suppressed information for malintent, which I did interact with some of those individuals that I know the younger patients didn't. And I did see that. And yeah, basically, is not just people who were potentially ill or anything. I mean like just individuals that they, in most regard, usually would change their mind upon meeting someone like me or speaking to someone like me, just because they were misguided on what they thought the treatment was. Most of them were not bad individuals. Sometimes they were like people who were just trying to somehow profiteer or some such, uh, from my minimal understanding. But everybody I attempted to speak to, like on, like, let's say Reddit comment chains or something, like, or the small times on Facebook initially, it would have been people, potentially even experts, that were not given all of the information due to the circumstances with the children and protecting us and such, because that's such a difficult situation. Really, it is, to, but once given more information, like from someone like me who has full say on, I get to make the call on what gets to be said or not. I'm the one, and the doctors, they don't get to do that, and sometimes fortunately, sometimes unfortunately, and that's kind of what, to an extent, my role became, for a time there. It was to talk to some of those people. I have not encountered that in recent years, but in this time frame that we're speaking of, that was that. Mm-hmm. Do you mean into 2008, or like later on when I read into what actually went on during that time period? Oh, okay. Well, what would have been? Okay, the biggest thing was that in '08, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, or healthcare reform, and etc., was initially campaigned on and planned to be a Medicaid expansion, which would have been including me and the other children, because we would have been under research budgets for the military, and the military, basically, because that's how that works in the United States. It's not, it's pretty niche, but it runs through the Department of Energy and then the Department of Defense, and that's what it is. It's related to kind of how, if you have any understanding of the black budget and financial pipelines regarding to that, this would be the same thing. To, keep HIPAA protocols and such, and so that, children can be protected. It's just, that's always what the United States has done regarding any human trials, and that includes medical things. It doesn't have to be some spooky, scary thing. It's all very mundane, and it, the Medicaid expansion would have been, or is still, kind of what we have today in some states like mine, Louisiana. Medicaid expansion for income purposes is really just that. It's an expansion of the same system I've always been a part of, and in order to increase access for the patients, which was the number one priority, so that the patients, especially like me, who are such a high valued entity because of all of the billions of research dollars put into us, that it gets actualized in an efficient manner. There's so few of us, first ones. Studies have been going on for 50 years plus. There's a lot on the line, and they want not just us, but everybody to get in the same pipeline, so that there's not people who slip through the cracks, just because we have a segregated, like, Medicare Medicaid, private kind of toss up. That was all actually explained to me when I was just about to undergo treatment in like, let's say May or April or somewhere around there, and then sometime after in like the fall of '08, and then I think again in 2009. It was that just didn't happen from when I read into it at all. It kind of diverged and became more of a reform of the private industry in order to, which affected me greatly, um, fix employment law. And this is something I only know a lot about now because of me being disabled and having tried to look into employment and stuff, and that just I'm retired now because that just it doesn't work for someone like me. But that's they were basically trying to make new programs for me because they could then make it for other kids in the future. So I learned a lot about that, and it all centered around employment, indemnity insurance, and all of that was that's what the Affordable Care Act kind of became, was reforming that so that someone with cancer doesn't just, or any chronic condition, doesn't just so severely affect the insurance of an employer so that they can be hired whenever they otherwise just have no conflicts, which which wasn't just for someone in a rare situation like me who wouldn't be able to work, but in a common situation like the advancements in breast cancer have been incredible, and you have someone who might just have to go in once a year or something, and they're either cured or practically cured, and they under the previous to '08 kind of system, they wouldn't have been hireable because of a small business may have just gone bankrupt. And that was something that they kind of explained to us as children, but I didn't really understand until I got into high school. Like just looking at the numbers and seeing, wow, it's not just me bankrupting everybody because nobody could afford insurance on someone with who's basically guaranteed by the federal government, but a normal individual. And there's still exactly. So if the real reform was the Medicaid encompassing and the military takeover of insurance, from a financial pipeline perspective, just so that we'd have streamlining in the United States. That was always what I grew up with, thinking the Affordable Care Act was. But when I did write into it later, that's when I learned in school that it was not at all that. No, no, no. I have like as much time as you need. You can go longer than an hour if you need to. Before I answer that, just so I understand correctly, this is a because I know I've probably gotten you off topic. This is a overall survey of politics in Reddit, or just like, or do you want me to like go into, because like my involvement into the Donald Trump subreddit kind of extends past just the subreddit and into the whole campaign process, but I can stick to just the subreddit if that's relevant. Oh, okay. Oh, then no issue. Yeah. Yeah, let's do that. That's interesting. So you're basically the main focus is on the like adjusted migration of users from a political perspective through online communities. Well, that's good to know because I have. Well, that goes all the way back to medical for me. I knew about Donald J. Trump, uh, not as the guy on TV with The Apprentice and stuff, all the way back to when I started treatment. Uh, and actually, people like nurses and stuff joking around be- with jokes about that and me not getting the joke. I knew about it from a perspective of a childhood cancer patient because Trump was a legend in awareness and uh, flat out providing money for treatment for children who were in situations like me. And he'd do it even without bringing a lot of media attention. He'd just fly somewhere across the world and pay for and get a kid a new heart transplant or something. It's not something that even was focused that much in the campaign trail. From uh, from what I'd ascertain why is because irregardless of everything political, the guy really, really respects the children and like not affecting them. And that's why I don't think it was ever brought up just because of that by any side politically. It was just kind of, it's just kind of, a thing that everybody understands is not to be messed with. It would just be inappropriate. But that's how I initially knew about Trump. It was that was even if it didn't affect me personally, it's still something you kind of know about. And it because like I got Make a Wish and stuff. They gave me a cell phone back then. So I mean, I was still connected to that whole charity based thing with that. And Trump was involved with all of them, with the WWE things, with like Special Olympic, with like everything. It was just probably his focus for charity. I mean, billionaires they do that kind of a thing. It's normal, and but for me that was kind of growing up what I just always had remembered. So I associate him with that and with politics and with medicine more than anything else, at least at a younger age. So on Reddit in 2012, the Trump campaign staff created a exploratory campaign for president. Not a lot of people remember that, but that happened. There's videos that you can find if you look kind of hard, honestly, of him being in New York announcing a potential run for the presidency. Uh, and Before that even happened, there was a community on Reddit. Don't recall if it was just our Donald Trump, or if it was another Trump themed or whatnot subreddit, but I participated in that one. And that we were the beginning community, and we were all on Reddit, and that so that's my start with that. And that did that go anywhere? No, but there was still influence with us on Reddit in the second Obama administration term. There was quite a lot actually. That was my like middle point of high school and on, and that was the biggest influence was users that I recognized from that community, basically spreading out and significantly internally with Reddit, maybe not even congregating ourselves, but like carrying on what the campaign promises and such were for Trump, which a lot of it revolved around healthcare, to other like Ask Reddit threads and other things like that. And I'd say everybody probably migrated for a few years at least, because I think they shut down all of the subreddits. And then in 2015, there was well, in part of 2014, there was things with the GOP, with the GOP's ability to choose through their electors who they're going to run for the president. And I was involved in that as well, more or less than I had understanding of at the time. And was I a moderator back then? I don't know, but I was there a lot. And moderation back then on Reddit was significantly different too. So moderators had admin perms at one point. I don't recall if it was 2014 that changed finally, so that like a normal moderator couldn't delete the subreddit, because around that time that was still the case. I was in the beta or maybe alpha portion of Reddit as a developer, because that's had been when I decided to go into computer science. So it was, I had more of like beta features than a lot of people did, so I don't really know if I'm lining up the timeline correctly. But that we had like a few subreddits, and it was like Mr. Trump and like other subreddits, and then that kind of moved into the Donald and the R Donald Trump, which did we have that open for the whole? We kind of had that for a little bit, and then was like immediately shut down, kind of like it was this election cycle as well. Yes, on the Donald and our Donald Trump, just like I was this time. But I don't recall on the first R the Donald or R Donald Trump. I don't know if I was the moderator on that or just involved with the community. It was something like that. It was kind of more loose back then. We weren't as cohesive, I'd say. It was more just how Reddit typically works with moderation. If who wants to be a moderator, apply. That's how everything starts. And there was a bunch of differing Trump themed things, and I was a moderator of like one maybe, or like just knew the moderators of it and basically contributed through that. That was more of my role, was less of having the green name and more of just somehow knowing the guys who were involved, and maybe like especially some younger ones in Gen Z, and possibly playing video games with them or something. It was always stuff like that. Hmm. As I learned things, especially in school, if it was socially related, like during the pre run up to the 2016 election, so like whenever, which would have been called not just the meme war, but like the social kind of class warfare, in a meme context, if you will. I mean, you don't have to include, I wouldn't include any of that in your paper, but um, that was kind of how communally on Reddit it was kind of referred to, and a lot of that had to do with some drama subreddits and us and others, and going back and forth over some socially hot button topics, especially with the younger crowd. Religion would come up every so often, and I went to a religious parochial school, and we studied how we had religious studies, we had theology classes, and as I learned more about that, I could contribute more in those discussions. That's the only kind of thing I think I could pin that would have been a change over time, because otherwise it would have stuck to mainly healthcare. and that extends to everything, so it would have basically encompassed everything that isn't religion. I mean, when I say healthcare, I'm talking about myself. If you understand the scoping of security, uh, or the scoping of from a software engineering perspective of something that residing within something that's an array or an object tree, I'd be operating in the global scope, and there'd be things underneath the global scope. And healthcare, let's say for me, would have put me in the global scope above everything else. And because above everything else is defense, and healthcare is part of defense. And so I had basically knowledge of everything scoped in, but I couldn't get more scoped out. So there wasn't really any, unless I just flat out went to a totally different thing, like which I'd class religion as. Um, I would have stuck to a very scientific, very real world kind of you can things you can touch and such, like defense, um, uh, type of topic. And underneath healthcare, one of the hot button topics they would have extended to immigration, immigration reform, movement of migrant peoples. All of those I knew a lot about because I was taught about them from doctors, because I was involved with the some of the changes to, because they polled the kids and such, to pandemic and emergency response. They not that much, we're children, we don't make up policies, but they ask the children like what they thought about certain things from a child's perspective, having already set in stone something, so they can try to better disseminate it to civilians, because these would have been like military doctors and stop talking to me. And the military has very specific, you can actually look it up, it that if you don't already know about it, the not the CDC's just pandemic response, but you would want to go and look at the Army Field Guide for uh, chemical and biological warfare, the Naval Guide for or Naval codes for uh, biological contaminants, I believe, and there's like one other, and those things will be very enlightening on what I'm talking about scope and how they did actually pull up these things and show them to a child. And I would have been that person who would have brought that into play in every single argument, I suppose, on especially the political subs. That was what I always was doing. Was, oh, it's an immigration topic. Oh, I'm gonna bring up this again and again and again and again, because that's all I ever knew. I knew about being immunocompromised. I knew about how I get notified by my physicians like immediately. I might not be able to go to this state over here. I might not get to go to Nevada if I wanted to. If my parents wanted to go on vacation, we had to wait one time because they had some issues with immigration. It was a very real part of my life that, uh, and that was my contribution, I suppose, in this regard. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Huh. Um. Well, back then I didn't have much. It would have been minimal. Probably more of like text based, if that. Because I still hadn't migrated over completely to PC, and until I did that, and I was later in high school, was when I started to do that. Until then, it would not have been a very large interaction. So we're talking 2015, 2016, and above, probably 2016 and above. So basically, winning the first election and above, I would have had much greater interaction. But until then, socially, I was barely distant, I'd say. And you have to understand, most of the people I'd be interacting with, I would take like I would in all cases, a very professional response to. I treated it as like I was speaking to and about something extremely important to like my doctors or something. That was just my default. So I didn't really have a much of a social interaction sort of a thing. That never really crosses my mind most of the time. Yes, yeah. Even if I didn't early on, I still absolutely did. And if not just by influence and being so niche, I was the only one who knew anything about healthcare, honestly, for a very long time. Uh, and I still kind of, I wouldn't say I am now, but in the early days, depending on what communities we're talking about, because of the flow of individuals and it's how moderation works on Reddit, um, I was more of a staple. And I just, yeah, my knowledge kind of, even if my age was odd, I tended to have quite a need to have that kind of an attitude for administrative purposes, even if I didn't run anything. I still, it was kind of that environment. Yeah. Not for politics. Oh, I, I would say a few others, but they were all directly relating to Trump. And they weren't me involved with any moderation or administration. It would have been just me participating in honestly just researching, I guess, because I didn't understand anything about them. Like that was I did that quite a bit with the some of the transgender subreddits. Um, I was one of the ones who could participate and was not banned immediately because I've always been moderate enough, and and at times even seen as a spam and such. So, back in the day before spam filters were more advanced, individuals would get their account flagged by like auto tagger and things. I think it's auto tagger, but it's been a long time. The plugins that would have been non Reddit made, uh, those tended to have very basic scripting in them, and on purpose, for security. So you could get an individual who didn't say anything wrong. They just may have said a word that one community sees as negative or potentially would cause the thread to devolve into negativity and less good faith participation, even if it could have been good faith participation. Like that I've seen a lot in election. We've gotten really good about filtering those types of things to where someone comes in and will be like, "Oh, this XY politician, yeah, I kind of like this," and then immediately comment multiple times about how, "Oh, but I kind of don't like this about." So they're like basically supporting and at the same time not supporting, which brings the narrative to a negative and particularly impactfully negative context, especially back then. Nowadays, that doesn't happen just because of Reddit itself, but that a lot of people got themselves tagged and stuff by unintentionally doing that, uh, and when it was brand new, kind of a thing. Well, no, not transgender specifically. Mainly our politics, I think. I was the only one who actually went to like a transgender. Yes, yeah, exactly. It would be like I was the one who had the medical knowledge, so I would phrase it in a medical context, and a not against the patient, but maybe against the politicians who were screwing the patient over. And it didn't mean the others didn't feel the same, because they absolutely did, because I conversed with them. But it, it, I was the only one who seemed to be able to articulate, in a lot of cases, that specific medical side, being a patient myself, and that was what I think allowed me to even participate at all in some of the uh, trans, lesbian, gay, bi, etc. Subreddits without immediately getting kicked out, basically, because I understand their perspective. It's just it, I'd say critical of, from a fearful of them being exploited kind of a perspective, not critical of them. They didn't sound like they hated gays or anything. It would have been a fearful of negative treatment to them, but not actually knowing how to express that a lot. That's come a long way in the last few years or so, but you still see it every now and again. I would have been considered basically perpetually the one of the most liberal, and I don't know if I'd say progressive. If you're talking like nowadays definition, no, but the original progressive definition of from like 100 years ago, yes, towards any disability or medical condition, just because of my background, and and that was always kind of an oddball to an extent from a lot of others in just a community perspective. Not talking about just moderators, I'm talking about like just overall. I'd I'd be like an odd comment out, and typically get upvoted to the top because of it. Those kind of things. Oh no, not from my perspective. No, not at all. But from perspective of most in that you poll, yes, I'd be considered a moderate. However, because their perspective of like the GOP and the Republicans are false. Basically, it's not. It's kind of just, well, to be frank, quote unquote fake news. From my perspective, and from any buddy in any community that I'd be a part of who would know me, or just read a body of like comments I'd write or something, I'd be considered probably one of the most conservative, absolutely, because it'd be more of a traditional populist Republican, like from 100 years ago, of in the course of like, uh, you know, the Unionist, uh, post Civil War, stay together, no discrimination, and and conservatism that was not the radicalism that some people unfortunately would associate with it, but from the actual correct historical context. Because the radicalism part that was perpetuated by the media was historically incorrect. They just seemed to latch on to words and not read a textbook. but the textbook will say, I mean, Wikipedia said otherwise. I didn't even learn about what it would be typed as, like classified in a certain extent, and I just like clicked on the political tree thing on Wikipedia, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'd be around here, and it's pretty dead on. It's just very conservative in some respects, like defense and etc., and conservative in response because it would be a strong response in a do everything we need to do to get it done, like build big walls, beautiful bridges, uh, increase the military, all of those things in order to be more secure in healthcare and stuff for everybody. Those types of things, I'd say, are actually fairly uh, rare in the communities. I'd say for Trump, you see the large base of us is the moderate to conservative of the country. Basically, everybody who's not far left is basically under us. From what I've seen as a moderator, from what I've seen for campaign stuff, it's basically ubiquitous. People who 10 years ago would have been considered Democrat are not anymore. That kind of a thing. Because most of the country is still moderate. And I would be kind of like a bit more conservative than moderate. But otherwise, our nation is very, very moderate. No, no, I've always been had pretty extreme views, especially with things regarding healthcare. Like people, I'd say a large part of the base is the libertarian is included, and myself growing up in the center of the Tea Party movement. Literally, my district is congressionally the where it basically is um, in Louisiana. This is it, and I've grown up knowing that and seeing that and meeting those people, and it's normal. And I would have been basically inverse to them because I every do everything we need to do kind of to do it guy. We need to get to Mars in 10 years. We can do that. This is what we need to do. Let's get it done kind of a thing. And other people might be like, but to do that, we would lose some freedoms, quote unquote. Because I don't basically have any extremist portions in regards to things that are not real. So, like, things with this pandemic, I was from day one the guy who would have been saying lock everything down, lock everybody up, have a no tolerance policy to anything that deviated from that because that's the by the book military response. And that's kind of defined my whole life. And that's because I understand seeing myself and growing up that way, like with the medical, what that impact truly means in the lives, what those lives mean. And to me, that was always something that still now most people don't, I believe, understand, and I don't fault them for it. It's not something that by training most people should understand because that would be negative to their performance. It's something that very few would be rated as in the military to be put in for something like that in like a hot in like as a corpsman or such. It's not a it's something that they pick and they choose a specific type of person, and that's their path. And that's how I've grown up, is not in that path, but knowing that exists and applying that, having that applied to everything in my life, and seeing how effective that is. And that is a very non-free sort of way towards everybody else. So everybody else I probably be friends with, talk to, hang out with, even in these communities, probably most of them I'd say would have a very inverse extremist perspective from the conservatism that I would follow in regards to response. They don't necessarily disagree with how things have gone with COVID, but if you spoke to any of them, you'd probably hear a lot about the effects of this and freedoms moving forward, which to me I don't even talk about, because I don't not distance myself. I just don't really think of that first. I'm like, that if anything would be kind of part of the autism. I just am like distanced from that by nature. I don't look at something and understand really at face value that, or I do now, but like younger definitely not, all these concepts of something that's not necessarily real to me. I'd be looking at it and being the guy who would count it, figure out what's going to happen, and just be like doing that by nature, while everybody else is debating some sort of like what freedoms we should have is by the Constitution. I'm kind of ignoring that. Yeah. I'm basically an engineer. That's like, yeah, problem solving. That's perfect. The only thing I ever saw, everybody came closer to what I was talking about, basically. Basically the same, but that's what I've seen my whole life. So not just anybody I interacted with, but like I've done that, like just talking to scientists before who were 40 years my senior when I was younger and stuff. Like just them recognizing I exist changes everything, because they're given more data. And the same thing happens with everybody to me, is like, if before they'd espouse purely freedom as like abstraction, like you'd say, uh, they now espouse the same freedom, at least when they're speaking to me, um, they, with the recognition that, oh, but lives are on the line, and I want to grow up in a world that my children are not like him, like in terms of like they don't have to ever be concerned about what he has gone through in his life. We're going to make it better, that kind of a thing. That's the thing I've seen with people, is that they that their freedom kind of a thing uh, it became less abstract and more beelined into the like, oh, before I didn't like, like quite uh, trust the government as much. Actually, maybe people trusted the government less after talking to me, which I don't know if I haven't intended to do that, but I don't know how to stop that from happening. So I kind of gave up a long time ago. But that kind of libertarian distrust type of a deal kind of moved to like a, we need to do something tangible so that we can, because of our distrust, and because we see what he has to do and go through, that's not going to happen again, kind of a deal. if that makes sense. I've basically seen everybody move closer to me and away from any type of other probably negative to the nation extremism. But I don't think I was ever interacting with literally anybody who would have been stereotypically called a radical extremist. Those people just were never involved. We banned everybody who was like that. They would have been downvoted so much, and they would have been basically ostracized from the second they tried to join a community like us, just by nature that they were too different. Oh, I don't actually know a way to describe this outside of software engineering perspective, so I'm just gonna do that. But like, it is basically down to spam and filters. They would have been either trolls or they would have been the legitimate radicals. Like, and it would run from anything from filtering out um, legitimately insidious attempts at uh, don't think lobbying, but think um, what is it called when it's a when you're like dropping pamphlets to propagandizing. Think of like propagandizing by an enemy nation state, but not an enemy nation state because these would have been like funded by terrorist organizations and things, trying to basically, and very incompetently, I might add, because they were talking to us. Why would they do that? They know anybody who can speak English would know that this is not the place, but that's why it made it so easy to remove. Uh, but they would do things like something would come up about like Islam, and you'd have the normal Trump supporting Muslims, and then they have people like trying to move them towards very clear radical extremism to be like uh, moved into like a gang or move into like ISIS or something. Not maybe not specifically ISIS, but just people who were very clearly not in the United States. They may have been legitimate users. We may not have been even able to tell, but they definitely existed. And you could, especially in regards to them trying to talk specifically when they could find a faith practicing Islam or faith practicing Muslim, like a devout Muslim who was also conservative and also voted for Trump and supported Trump. They were there, lots of them, lots all the time, and you would see people, you'd see these quote unquote users responding to them in stereotypically the same way, and those same Trump supporting Muslims were always the ones who would respond basically right away and strike down the same espoused extremism for what it is. So we had very little trouble, I'd say, with that because these attempts would have either moved them away if they were a legitimate user from their own extremism, which was a great sight to see, or it would have just mounted in, oh, we found another botnet. We're going to ban literally everybody, which that was mostly what happened. And I didn't really deal with a lot of that. It was more of like, I knew more some of it because of the engineering background, but there were, it was more of like a handled by Reddit, handled on in above Reddit, handled by the military, who would like do stuff with from a top down perspective across all of social media because a few years ago that was a big deal, and Reddit I don't think even had much of a problem from my perspective. I don't think there was an issue. Twitter had a big issue, but that because of how it was designed. But Reddit, not really. And that was the only, probably, what was the question about, like, extremism again? That I think, and that's probably one of the only things that I think I could discuss, unless you ask me a follow up question that I could then move into. No, no, they were never. They wouldn't. By definition, we always had that, you wouldn't be a Trump supporter if you were politically extreme. It was always 100% that. There were people who acted like they were Trump supporters, but then you'd click on them, or you use the some great plugins like, I don't even know if I still have them installed, but you could pull up an entire user's history. Do I have this? No, probably don't. You could pull up the history of a user in a thread from one click, and in that one click, you'd see basically an aggregation of every time they've commented, a percentile of where, when, and how, and you would be able to, by at a glance, effectively know they were not a Trump supporter. And it was always the same things. It would be someone who would build an account because they got banned already, and they do this for fun, even if it's odd to say that. And they'd build up karma in the big subreddits if they could, but that would negatively affect them coming to a politically specific subreddit like the Donald, because Donald basically only self-contained itself by nature and by Reddit quarantine to try to not affect other users negatively. It was on purpose. So you would have so if anybody wasn't primarily participating in like the Donald or our Donald Trump or our Trump or whatnot, you would basically immediately know this person has come here explicitly with malintent. And it's you could print out back in the day on paper a handful of threads, and anybody reading through every single comment, they'd understand what I'm talking about. It's so blatant. And those people just were not Trump supporters. They'd get into the thread that a Trump tweet and would be literally counteracting whatever the president was speaking of. The president was speaking of assisting with refugees in air-conditioned conditions and increased nutrition that didn't have it before, and we're implementing some newer policies building off of like our time in Afghanistan and stuff from way back with Bush. Like research from then we're now finally able to put in place today. So it might not even have 100% like credit given to Trump's administration. It just happened now, but we're doing it. And then they come in and they so very radically hate the fact that they're getting air conditioning or something, whenever the air conditioning is there in order to allow them a more amicable assimilation in a actually deadly heat. Because, so basically they'd be by insinuation saying that they should die, which is very obviously the antithesis of the previous administration, the most pro-life administration you could find across the board. Like my experience with the charity work, that applies to everything else. And even if it cost quite a lot of resources, and to most people, by critique, even Republicans and stuff, was unnecessary. That's what most people had a gripe with, was the extreme expenditures on things like that. That people like me would really like, but a lot of other people just didn't understand. But these radical users, they were very clearly just going in and always using that like insinuation of death type of example. Like you take that and you can apply it to everything, and you'll find those users. You can probably find them still today on Reddit and like our politics if you'd look. Friends, peer-reviewed literature. Basically, I don't get my information from other people. I kind of just have it, if that makes sense. I mean, I guess the best, yeah, just because I don't really look into or have honestly the time to look into news. So if it doesn't really relate to me, I won't know about it. A lot of things relate to me, so I might know about it. But peer reviewed literature is one of the first places I check, just because it's very efficient. And I or newer publications, not in the Federal Register because it's honestly too verbose, but in the tables of data, like like gov.info, honestly GitHub. I mean, like software engineer GitHub, like you can find similar things there and just kind of figure stuff out. Most of anything I do for research would be pertaining to healthcare, and that and news relating that. Also, there's you can sign up on the email list for the government, and you can custom tailor the federal emails you get so that you don't get the typical consumer emails, but you instead get the emails that are sent out to service members, to those actively posted and active duty, to you can basically get everything that is not a classified cable or diplomatic cable sent to you. And it's not that hard. That's actually where I get like the most important news on healthcare is from that. Like not the ones where it's like more nutrition for you, but like the oh next month like the other day like next month we're doing a uh, uh, caregiving seminar thing. Sign up for it here. It's like April like 26th or something. Those things, and then if you attend those things, they're not very long. Will be typically someone high up in in an agency or secretary of something or other talking about it, or some expert professor talking to peers, and you could be there asking questions too in a chat like Twitch or something. And that's, I'd say, the most useful, the best news for me. That's where that's been. They're just kind of entertainment focused, and I'm busy. I've never been a guy to watch TV or do things like that, and I'm not really entertained most of the time by their programming at all, because of how misinformed most of the time it is, or just generally, it's even the best examples are still so negatively slanted against a positive perspective for the future of our nation. I'm just not that. I don't particularly enjoy seeing individual talking heads around a round table talking about how like it's the end of the world. Even if they're bringing something up that's legitimate and is good that they're getting it out there, it's kind of like you could. I get they're doing it for they have because they have to. It's a job, but it's like it would be nice if they'd also say like, oh yeah, yeah, this happened, but like also we just got breakthroughs in this, and the only way we could have known the bad thing is if we read the full report and we learned about the good thing. So they could say both, but they don't. What's a newswire? Oh, I see Reuters all the time on for financial stuff because it pops up on the financial subreddits. Yeah, I probably Reuters, I guess. I don't know about Associated Press, but yeah, I didn't even know how to pronounce that. But this one, yeah, Reuters is all over the financial stuff that I look at. 100%. This, if one I had to pick, it would be this one with like stocks and bonds and commodities. They get stuff out like 5 a.m. every day. Nope. No, I mean it's been like the exact same. Yeah, no, I mean like yeah, the exact same. A few times in the past, I explicitly went out of my way to try to consume other things like NPR and stuff like. I made a big effort when I was like earlier in high school because I was really trying because I had never looked into news before, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this because people on Reddit are talking about doing this, and so that's actually kind of why I was entirely aware of it. I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. I should try to like broaden my horizons in this, and all I found was the exact same, literally. And I knew enough about the algorithms back then, and it's only gotten worse. So I mean, you see the it's from an engineering perspective, a interesting field to go into for that for AI research, but to everybody else's perspective, it's probably not noticeable. But like when you, with even a base now level of knowledge like myself, okay, maybe I have more than a base, but like I didn't like graduate college, so I mean like, I'm not technically educated, so but you can see it everywhere, especially with news because it's a very very simplistic setup because they don't actually want to make it more complex. They could make it to where it would be very difficult for an individual to pull up like Fox, CNN, and etc. and find the same quote unquote news in opinionated ways across all three. You on their front pages or etc. Which you can find probably right the second. But like they could make that to where it would be, but they don't do that because users engage less. If they were to make it more natural, it with and not influenced, the influencing is optimization for them, and it's not much else. Well, it's not just recommender; it's more of like all that exister. Like it's the only thing that you're gonna see, kind of a deal. It would be before recommending. So it'd be like if you didn't have an account and you didn't have cookies and you signed in or weren't signed in, you were on a new machine or something like that for development environment. What would you see, kind of a thing? It would be what they're publishing at all, and on that day, they have like cyclings and stuff typically, unless there's like a war that's gonna start or something else that would change things, and then everybody would be talking about like literally breaking news. Is But otherwise, for news even fairly breaking, you would see them have a way to publish it before you get to where it's curated for the user. That's kind of what I'm talking about. It's at the base level, and then it's built on top of. That's what makes Reddit probably so great, that I always really liked, was the aggregation, was the user recommender. I really liked not seeing what I didn't want and only seeing what I wanted, and that obviously works with a like Fox and CNN too. I'm just not their target audience. Well, I discuss it online with them, but like they're still people I know offline. that makes it all Discord basically. Like it's all my conversations with everybody in my life have basically been on Skype, Discord, TeamSpeak, whatever. Or like right now it's Skype. Like this is my typical way to talk to anybody, and not as much face to face. And I'd say the only thing that anybody would talk to me about, besides the game we're currently playing, or even during the game we're currently playing, is solely politics. Basically, that's kind of always how it's been. But even before I really got involved in any moderation things, it's just always been what we talked about. Oh, I don't know. I've been too busy. I haven't really talked to anybody lately. Oh, sorry. Well, typically for me, and I don't know how old you are, but um, it's been about education, job placement, and things regarding that. Since I typically would be up to or involved with, like with Social Security, with other things, I'd be knowing the researchers being placed in trial work experiences by them, by like PhDs and stuff, and just I know what the at least last administration what we're going to be doing before everybody else will see it because I'm the trial. That's how being basically a research subject your whole life is, especially at this level. And I'd be the guy who I'm talking to all my friends, and they're all in college, they're just graduating, the coronavirus is hitting, they don't have jobs, maybe they do have jobs, most of them have always had jobs, and it would be okay. You're struggling. Here's this new website that Ivanka was just uh, is really pushing, which was like last summer, and I saw that website grow from like when it was live, and I was bringing it up like, hey, I'm gonna specifically contact friend A, and I know you've been looking into this and you haven't been able to find anything. What about right here? Because and tell me like if this is good for you because I'm gonna bring it up to the other guys. Some of them might even work with the campaign staff and might like probably design part of this website and tell me what's wrong with it. Like that's been kind of my thing. I haven't done that as much lately, but because with job things. But I think my last few conversations were regarding the stimulus, the oil industry because of my state, Louisiana. That's a big. That's basically all of our economy, and the stimulus and its effect on the oil industry and hopefully jobs in the future for people economically, how much longer I think coronavirus might last because people just trust me at this point because I get information from my doctors and for like whenever it's safe for the cancer patient to go out and about is irrelevant to healthy people, but since I would be on the and already have had the first part of the vaccine, I would be one of the very first individuals in the country to get the approved vaccination and stuff like that, and how that would affect them in getting a job since they're graduated and they need a job, or they're looking into moving into a new apartment. I think was like a dude last week or some a few weeks ago. I I, I don't recall when the day who I was talking to for my last conversation, but that's been in the last month or so. What it's been about has been because of the vaccination rollouts, how talking to them about like what they could expect in the near future for job opportunities especially. Oh yeah, sorry about that. Don't mean to talk your ear off. I mean, only boycotting a brand, but that would be just because if I'm boycotting them, it's not due to something that's not real. Like if they make a solid product and it's the cheapest and it's good and I like it, I'm gonna buy it. I don't care what they're talking about. You know, they're just I ignore their social media because I wouldn't see it anyway. But like someone or a company taking a nosedive by going out and bringing something that's not regarding their industry cannot be factored into, excuse me, their market sector and uh, returning returning to equity holders and the trust that their shareholders should get from them. If it's not something like that, and they're out there like basically protesting themselves as a company, even if they're worth billions of dollars in valuation, have been around for who knows, like 100 years, could be less, could be more. There's like because they're basically just their social media team is run by like fools. That's a very big stain to me. Well, I mean, I don't want to say in case you have to use the recording in something, but like if that's fine, I can say I was like, cause like I mean, like to me, the only one I think that I was like looking at, I was just like, come on, guys, was Goodyear because they were just. I don't really care in most cases because tech companies, it is actually relevant to them to stay up on the up and up for certain things, or else they'll lose all of their users. I understand that very well, so I don't blame them for saying whatever they need to say, just because that's just how the internet works. You know, you overlook it. It's no big deal, but the older companies that like have seen what the tech industry has done and are trying to emulate it in a field that's like manufacturing or just large scale industry, that's just totally ridiculous. You don't need to say anything and people will still buy your rubber, your tires. You're an institution and you're like talking about anything that's not, or anything at all really. Nobody's gonna, like, to me, I wouldn't care. I don't think anybody else cares, but like that's a big, on Reddit, that was a big joke because their share price dropped. I don't even remember it. I honestly have no idea. I don't even think I was awake whenever they said something. I was just like looking at Reddit, and then it was just everybody making fun of them. And their share price, like, it went like in half. You could probably look up the share price for them in the last like year or two and look at the graph and see where it like spiked downwards. Yeah, and triangulate what it was, and then like Google it, because like I don't even remember it, but it had to have been something that just made them out to be a joke. And that would, if I did drive or buy tires or something, I wouldn't buy it from them just because like whoever made that campaign for them, I don't even know how they like got put in place there. So like that's just a red flag to me. No, I don't really care most of the time. It's more of like with them. I guess it'd be kind of like a safety thing. Like if they're failing in this part of their company and whatever they make could keep me alive or not, why take a risk? Like, and I feel like a lot of people would say the same. A lot of people would say the same thing. Otherwise, if it's like, so if it's like them, if it's like some food company or something, if it's something that could like kill me, I'd say, oh man, like the them not understanding this part of their corporate structure, that must relate to everything else, and that like why take a risk? But like things like social media, I'd say every other individual company for gratuity, I could care less. I'm not. I wouldn't even notice it. I would not be aware of it at all, just because of how I don't look at news and stuff. Like I would. That's like tabloid stuff to me. Like don't like that because I don't like how undefined positive political change is. That's radical and in a bad way. That's like, or most people would see the military acting in something as radical. I don't. That's the entire opposite of radical to me. That's controlled. That's structured. That's if even if people have no experience with that in that sector at all in their life, and they just don't get what it really means, the military is the one place that you can guarantee it's happening for a reason, and there's a check and a balance on everything, and no one, and if anybody fucks up, they get executed. So it's like it's 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 to me it's the safest thing possible, even if that might be a fairly radical take on something. I think it's one you'll find with a lot of individuals who have any experience with that. But like the people who do the whole like ends justify the means thing, we need political change now kind of a thing. I don't know. Like that sounds like insurgency to me. Just hearing it just like that's what that comes to mind at first is an insurgency. I'd have to like actually see what they're talking about. Like, are they talking about we need change now? We need to take up arms because some people literally put shackles on us and they're working us to death in some mines in America. Like, that's a big deviation from with the context there from just like the initial thing. I'd have to like see it myself, kind of a deal. It wasn't an insurrection. It was just a bunch of dumbasses rioting basically at the end there. I mean, I was watching some live streams at some points, and for the most part, there wasn't much violence at all. But just like any of those types of events, the later on it goes, you'll see literally insurrectionists actually show up, typically with things like famously in examples in the past. I don't know if just last year, but in 2016, which some people were arrested and I believe convicted for dropping off bricks near individual buildings so that they could, after the protesters themselves protested and such, and later on in the event, they could infiltrate the crowds, grab bricks, and do things like smash windows to try to incite violence and insurrection for political reasons. And some people were paid and stuff. That happened years ago and is something that gets brought up every now and again. That isn't at all, in my perspective, what happened on January 6th. It was a bunch of people showing up, and there's a lot of people. Some later on in the, especially like some people could have been drinking or something. Later on in the day, you get on any side, especially when there's a lot of upset people around, across the board. You get these. It's a very prime target for the actual, very real insurrectionists who are very much not on the Trump base at all. They're the people who are the black bloc type individuals who just will show up and are found on camera. You can see them on YouTube with streamers all the time. They and in any community, they the Black Lives Matter protests were a prime example because of how good the Black Lives Matter protesters themselves were at basically rooting out these individuals and giving them to the police. That happened quite a few times, and to see that live on some streamers who were just streaming live themselves is quite a sight to see. And I didn't see that on January 6th, but like if you see photographs and stuff, you can pick out who they are. It's very clear. They're always the ones who pick up stuff to throw it. They're always with the Trump base is typically the ones standing by the cops. The law enforcement and the Trump base go hand in hand, just like the military and the Trump base. So it's very it's just calling it an insurrection on the side of like the conservative Trump base is just false. But calling it an insurrection because insurrectionists showed up and did try to hit people with bottles and stuff, and maybe light some things on fire. Sure, yeah, because I mean, you know that warrants a response by law enforcement. Those people are committing a crime, and that was inappropriate. They shouldn't have been doing that. No, 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 because they're just they just by where they're standing, like physically, it's very clear. They're just because they're at a Trump rally or something doesn't mean they're a Trump supporter. Many, it, just in the same is true for any other protests. You had people on both sides come to almost protest each other, and fights break out and stuff. And the January 6th is a prime example of that, with a with some, you know, of the most egregious examples from my understanding, because I didn't see these live, were the same old of people just trying to, you know, get just as close as they can to fighting, with law enforcement not stepping in and just, you know, pushing them apart. And that's and sometimes these people are able to successfully basically fight before law enforcement can even reach them, because the crowds might be so dense. And at the January 6th, they were jam packed. That was a fairly disorganized, and um, there was a lot of people there. And I'd say that would be, if there was any people seeing it as like a blatant insurrection, I think that would have been the biggest factor. Usually, the stereotypical Trump protests are very organized, very safe in terms of fire hazards and stuff. They have people that are in charge of these types of things. Everybody respects it. They stand by the roads on the certain things. They stand enough feet apart. It's just something inherent. But that didn't happen as much then. From the stuff I was looking at, it seemed like, no, there should have been intervention from like a fire brigade or something to cordon people off into subsections. That could have probably assisted a lot, especially with aerial photographs of the environment, to where media may not have falsely assumed it's a bunch of people trying to usurp the government, and instead just a bunch of people who are kind of pissed off. And this is their way of showing it. We're gonna stand in front of the building, and we're gonna climb the thing, and we're gonna, like, because technically not trespassing on grounds that you can't not trespass on, or and stuff like that, it kind of gets a bit iffy, uh, and people are just kind of getting wild with climbing on things. It doesn't make it people attacking the government. It's just people being people, and if anything, acting a bit. They're basically mocking the structure, and fairly effectively, from my perspective. And in those examples of them at least doing that and then stopping at that extent and not breaking things, I see no real issue with that. If those things are objects, they're not people. I only care about the people. Someone hitting someone else with a bottle because they're mad, no matter what's going on, that's not acceptable. They should get charged for something. That they shouldn't be allowed to do that. That's on either side. That's not that is just not okay. Yep, yep. For Trump. Mm-hmm. Probably from the side of the person talking to other people to try to get them to vote for Trump. Yeah, but I also did the same thing with Kanye West because I saw that like that was a more conservative candidate that the Democrats could put up eventually. In terms of like a what that would resonate well with, maybe not him if he doesn't, if the West aren't going to want it like they've stated, it's, that's fine, it can be respected, but it could, but seeing it more from the perspective of this is what the younger crowd is looking for, I, and this is what is going to happen in 10 years. This is going to be the president is someone who espouses this. Maybe they're just a different person, but this kind of like amalgamation of both parties at once in a more overall moderate sense is definitely Generation Z, and that was kind of like 2018. What I was involved with was just hanging out with people and like, or 2019, I guess, partly, yeah, was like, you guys are receptive to this. You're like a few years younger than me or whatever. This is why, right? And they're like, yeah, that's definitely why. Because I just knew stuff about politics, and I was like it's because of these things, right? And they're like, yeah, definitely, that's 100%. Like, this is what we want. We don't like Trump because of this and this and this, but like, we're totally fine with like this and this and this and this. And I'm like, well, yeah. And like, even conversing with them and knowing me and being such a hardcore proponent of the administration and stuff, and them not even having qualms with the Trump administration, they still didn't support Trump. But they, as a candidate, they were like, well, we were not going to vote for him and stuff. But like, we're not even going to vote. But like, we'd vote for West. And I was like, okay, because he was similar in certain ways to Trump, and enough in, I guess, appealability and stuff, to where I was like, oh, okay, so this is just basically everybody was against the old guard politicians that I'd be talking to and around my age. But I don't know, just from a like, kids these days type of perspective, that's probably always been the case. But like, it seemed, and I don't just have friends who are just Republicans. I've probably played video games more with people who across the nation were absolutely opposite to me in political beliefs. And these were the individuals who I was basically asking just while playing games and stuff, like, would you be fine with like this? I think most of them probably never voted, honestly, because their candidates or anybody they liked didn't get put up by the Democrats. And they just were just not going to go with Trump. Most of them didn't articulate a reason. Those who did, I don't know, I'd say it was like, it's just him, and I can respect that. Some people, they loved the entertaining aspect, but maybe they just didn't like that just wasn't them, like wasn't resonating with them as a like a person. So, but like that was like that kind of is a long-winded answer to that question. Yeah, I was explicitly that guy that everybody on Trump based side was like, don't go and do this because don't do it. And I was like, no, I'm gonna go talk to them, and I'm gonna go ask why, like and what I found out was that this is the peak, because I was saying that like I think this is that, and then people like, oh, maybe a bit older than me was like, okay, you're right, but like, no way, or something. And then I was like, no, I'm gonna go ask him directly, and like I did, and there was like, oh wow, this is really the case, and but we can't do anything about it because it just isn't gonna happen. And I was like, well, oh well. Well, yeah, for certain. I mean, it always gives hope. I wouldn't say they were negative. It was just more of like I was I'd say I've always been a very gung ho type of individual, like and other people made me a bit more mature and wise in years, and such would state things like, that's, hold on there, like, we'll get there, kind of a thing. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it, kind of, that kind of a dichotomy. That's more of what I'm expressing. Would I be able to get a copy of the publication, like the published literature that you're doing with this when it's finished? I don't know how many years that'll take, but... Oh. Yeah, I would love that, yeah. Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye.